Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Brent Venables, the Oklahoma Sooners continue to work their way through fall camp, and Dill, at least in my opinion, the biggest storyline we are hearing out of Oklahoma's fall camp. Jake Taylor sounds like he's going to be the guy at right tackle. Dill, when we previewed Oklahoma's offensive line heading into fall camp, you kind of just knew that the best version of this Oklahoma offensive line included Jake Taylor starting at that right tackle position. This was a kid that we love coming out of Bishop Gorman in that 2022 class. And now going into year three, you kind of get the sense that he's putting it together. Want to get into Jake Taylor, dive into a little bit of the spring game that we saw. Dill, sneaky. Jake Taylor was a dog in that spring game. Really excited to get into Jake Taylor, talk about how this Oklahoma offensive line is shaking out. Before we get into it, as always, massive shout out to the Oklahoma fans. We've talked a lot of Oklahoma football over the last couple of weeks and months. The amount of support the Sooner fans have shown the boys, it's been amazing. We appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, you're probably a bigger Jake Taylor fan than I am. You watched the spring game a couple of different times. Before we get into some of the film, I'll give you the T-box here. Yeah, sell the people on Jake Taylor here heading into 2024.
And I think you kind of got it right. At the end of the day, if this Oklahoma offensive line was kind of going to get to the level where it feels like pretty much every other position group is on this whole team, not just the offense, the defense too, I think you needed Sexton and Taylor to be guys on this offensive line and starting, preferably at that tackle spot, because you bring in guys like Spencer Brown and Michael Tarquin, good, solid players, but they're probably not Oklahoma caliber right now. And where Oklahoma's going, where they're recruiting at, that's not the talent I think you want for this Oklahoma team. They're solid depth rotational guys, but I think when you look at what Jake Taylor brings and how talented he is and what his ceiling could have been, I think you always kind of looked him, Sexton. I think you wanted those guys to be.
You look at why Brent Venables probably decided to bring Spencer Brown and Michael Tarquin in. It's to push Jake Taylor and Jacob Sexton. Like, hey, we don't want to just give you guys the starting spots at tackle. We want to bring in some competition. There's no doubt in my damn mind that Brent Venables fully wanted Jake Taylor and Jacob Sexton to kind of emerge and win those battles because they have so much high upside at that tackle position. Now, getting into Jake Taylor, Dill, me and you have this conversation all the time because these are some sicko conversations we have. But we have the conversation of, hey, what football players at the collegiate level would you want at your back if you were to get in a bar fight? Like, Jake Taylor's one of those guys. This kid is a grizzly bear when he gets hands on you. And Dill, that was the thing that stood out to me during that Oklahoma spring game. He's not necessarily the cleanest athlete in pass protection. There is some development that you still need to see take place, which we kind of expected to take place. He was a good athlete coming out of high school. When he gets his hands on you, it is kind of game over because the play strength that Jake Taylor has, it's kind of next level stuff.
And honestly, the more I watch that spring game, I mean, you see plays where he's moving the way you want him to move, like getting depth in his kick slides and getting back, or like the way you'd want. And then there's some plays, obviously, where he sets really close to the offensive line and doesn't keep his feet moving. So to me, it's not even necessarily the athleticism that I'm questioning. It's the consistency. Can you have, like, again, when you think about like the Joe Thomas of the world, those really elite tackles, it looks kind of the same every rep unless you're really doing something different, like it's a screen or you're intentionally quick setting a guy just because that's what the play is kind of calling for. I think that's kind of the next step for Jacob Taylor, is just to be a little bit more robotic, frankly, where, again, you did see some of those reps where didn't really get off the line and you saw those good pass rushers, PJ, R. Mason Thomas, be able to get to his edge. That, to me, is the step, is just being a little bit more consistent. But, man, the more I go watch back that spring game tape, the more I think everything's kind of there. It's just about being as consistent as
I kind of had that same takeaway. We've watched this Oklahoma spring game multiple times from the spring to the summer. When you go back and watch Jake Taylor specifically, you come away a little bit more impressed. Still, you look at this first rep of the spring game working against Trace Ford. This is kind of what we're talking about in terms of the play strength and when he gets hands on these edge rushers. I mean, when he quick sets these edge rushers and gets hands on him, it's kind of game over because the grip strength, and then you see some footwork. You see some that ability to be really active with your feet while also playing with that play strength. I mean, just kind of ragdolling Trace Ford. You see the grip strength. You see that play strength. That's kind of what stands out to me. And you continue to work through some of these reps for Jake Taylor. I'm gonna call him Jacob Taylor so much because of Jacob Sexton. You work through the reps of Jake Taylor. Again, when he gets hands on these edge rushers, that's when he's at his best. You continue to work through the film, and Dill, you have to love the footwork that you see when you see Jake Taylor operating in kind of that phone booth situation as well.
And you can go a long way with just being straight up too strong for a lot of guys when you have that type of length and that type of strength. Like, again, you can get away with some sloppiness. And obviously, he's still kind of a young player in terms of playing experience. So you obviously hope that gets cleaned up. But I do think that allows him to get on the field quicker and just make less mistakes, or not make less mistakes, but be able to mask his mistakes just because he is kind of a premier athlete.
And you said it best. You're looking for the consistency with Jake Taylor. I felt like his first 2 years, they were kind of shuffling him around. He was kind of thought of as that utility offensive lineman for this Oklahoma program. The more and more reps he gets at the right tackle spot, I fully expect this kid to just get better and better. And he's probably one of those cats that maybe some growing pains early on in year 3. You kind of fast forward towards the end of the year, I would not be surprised if we're talking about Jake Taylor being one of the better tackles in the SEC because, again, he's got some really special traits. This is probably the best kick slide that you've seen on the film all game, right? I mean, the feet are active. The feet are really light. I mean, his feet do not get stuck in the ground. And, again, when he gets hands on him, this looks to be Trace Ford again. Dill, he was boxing Trace Ford all game. And I'm a fan of Trace Ford. Absolutely giving Trace Ford the work every single game. And Dill, I think what's even more exciting is you look at Oklahoma. This is a team that obviously wants to run the football. When Jake Taylor's getting downhill, he can move some bodies off the line of scrimmage.
And that's the exciting thing, because I think last year you kind of think about that offensive line. I know it had like a lot of experience and guys I think were perceived to be solid players. But again, I don't think you saw the draft picks you'd maybe expect to see going forward. And I don't think they were an explosive offensive line and had much of that ability to run guys off the ball. You kind of look at some of these new guys coming in, Jacob Sexton, for whatever he might lack in pass protecting polish, really, really good run blocking. Jake Taylor, really good run blocking. Then you got guys like Fabechi Nwewu. If Eugene Brooks comes in and plays, I thought he had a dominant physical spring game. I think this offensive line has a great possibility to, frankly, be able to run the ball a little bit more consistently and set their floor higher, because last year it did feel like they had to run a fair amount of like lateral side to side kind of stuff because their offensive linemen really couldn't move guys the way I think they're going to be able to move.
I'll throw out a hot take there. I think the Oklahoma offensive line was overrated last year. Like, I just don't think it was the dominant group that'll lead a lot of people.
Way too many negative plays. I think that was kind of the crux. They weren't an offensive line that was just like, you kind of knew you were getting minimum 3 yards because they're just going to blow guys off the ball. That just wasn't really them.
And you had some good players that went on to the NFL, but I just think as a unit, it wasn't as physically imposing as a lot of people kind of talk about them in the offseason, where you're going to see a drastic step back from this Oklahoma offensive line. I'm not going to get up here and say it's going to be better than what it was last year because a lot of these guys are new faces, and we got to see how this unit comes together. But it's not a crazy conversation to have that this Oklahoma team on the offensive line, if Jake Taylor and Jacob Sexton figure it out, I mean, this could be a really good offensive line.
And there's certainly, I think, can be a more physical offensive line.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to see it in the pass pro game. That's probably where you're throwing 5 new guys in, essentially. You got a lot of new faces and new continuity to kind of deal with. But again, I do think talent to talent, or not talent, but like physicality wise, I just see this unit as much higher.
And because of the RPO nature, sometimes they don't always ask the Oklahoma offensive lineman to really get downhill because you don't want to get some ineligible offensive linemen down the field. That being said, when you see Jake Taylor at this right tackle spot get asked to get working downhill, I mean, he can move bodies off the line of scrimmage. And quite frankly, Jackson Arnold, he's got to be handing this ball off. Like, I know there's a read there. He's going to pull it and get it to Deion Burks in the flat. You got to hand this football off every single time. Dill, you talk about this Oklahoma offensive line just being a little bit different. You look at this freeze frame. I mean, look at the reset of the line of scrimmage. Obviously, Jacob Sexton on the left side doing his thing at the guard spot, but you see Jake Taylor working on those down blocks and just moving bodies off the line of scrimmage. That's one of those things that I really do think Jake Taylor brings to this Oklahoma offensive line because, again, he's one of the more physically imposing offensive linemen that you see. Dill, let's get to that one thing that we want to see Jake Taylor continue to get better at. And that's really dealing with some of those twitchier edge rushers, right? There are times where he lets people get to his outside shoulder, especially on some of those counter moves. Now, he's going to be working against PJ Adebawore here. PJ Adebawore is a guy that I expect to emerge as one of the better pass rushers in the SEC in 2024. Really good initial set, right? I mean, again, one of those kind of quick sets there, getting hands on PJ. But when it deals with some of those counter moves and PJ decides to run that loop, that's where you see Jake Taylor just get a little bit stuck in the ground there. And again, I think that it's a good initial rep. You obviously shock PJ Adebawore. That's probably how you want to deal with an edge rusher like PJ, who is going to try to win on the outside shoulder. Just getting a little bit more consistent in terms of dealing with some of those counters and secondary moves. That's where you saw him get into some trouble. Now, on the flip side, for Oklahoma fans, you're fired up to see PJ kind of chain together some of these pass rush moves because, again, if he can do that in 2024, you're looking at a special edge rusher there and my guy PJ Adebawore.
And again, that's just like keeping the feet moving, and it's not as important when you're playing guard. And I feel like obviously he's worked in a fair amount there, at least in his first couple of years. But as he gets in that tackle role, it gets very crucial that the feet are active like we saw in some of those other plays. So it's like, again, when I look at it, it wasn't a physicality issue. I think I look like Michael Tarquin, there were just moments he couldn't catch up to an R. Mason Thomas or a PJ Adebawore. That's not really the case, I don't think, with Jake Taylor. I think for him, it's about just being consistent, keeping the feet moving, and he should be fine because I don't think there are physical limitations in this.
And you look at kind of the overarching storyline of this Oklahoma offensive line. Let's just play with a little bit of a what if, right? This is the season of doing what ifs. What if Jake Taylor and Jacob Sexton, who sound to be really emerging as your starting tackles, just what if they emerge as really quality starting tackles? I look at this Oklahoma offensive line and feel really damn good about it. Because you look on the inside, not a single question in the world about Branson Hickman coming in from SMU. This is a kid that's almost had 40 starts during his college football career. You look at some of the guards here, a guy like Fabichi Nwewu, a guy like Heath Ozeda, garnering a lot of buzz. Gary Hatchett, a guy that's played a lot of football at Washington, potentially someone like Eugene Brooks, and then Troy Everett. When he gets back healthy,
I don't even want to ignore Josh Bates. Again, when we talk about spring game, I thought he had an excellent spring game working with the ones at that center spot.
Josh Bates is another guy that makes my top 10 list in terms of guys I want on my back when I'm starting to get a little rowdy at the bar, because Joshua Bates, that dude is a nasty MFer. Now, okay, I look at this Oklahoma offensive line, and again, I'm excited. I'm optimistic about what it's going to be in 2024. We'll continue to kind of follow this storyline. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. It's always nice to get on and just talk about some guys that are emerging during fall camp. If you all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.